Hi, this is Starkey Sowers. Welcome again to another Plus Program training series. Today's topic, protein, and this is part 1. So what I thought we would do is just get some real basic information about protein. There's so much information out there about protein and amino acids, and it gets a little confusing at times. So I thought what we'd do is just kind of really simplify it today and just kind of give us some real basic starting points for protein and what it is. So when we look at protein, there's kind of some fun topics about it. A guy named John Jacob Berzelius is the one who actually gets credited in 1838 for the discovery of proteins, so to speak. And so he also, by the way, was one of the individuals that was instrumental in developing what we call the periodic table. So he had a lot of instrumental points in his career, and protein would be right at the top. One thing to remember about proteins, it's still probably the number one top researched macronutrient when it comes to research that's going on a regular basis. So still a lot of research out there. All right, so let's kind of look at the word protein. It comes from protos, which is a Greek word, which means primary importance or of primary importance. And one thing we know about protein is that it is absolutely essential. Without it, you will not be able to live. And there's essential components as well. So when it comes to our bodies, we have to have proteins on a regular basis. And so one of the things to remember about proteins, not only being essential, but also it's in all sorts of different types of foods. And we're going to have a look at that as well, too. All right, so let's look a little bit at the human body and let's kind of maybe understand where proteins are in the human body. So we maybe get a little bit more urgency, so to speak, about the importance of proteins. So when we look at proteins, obviously they're made of amino acids. And so, but where are they in the body, so to speak? And there's all different parts that we'll see in the body. Number one, there's structural components. So when it comes to bones, when it comes to muscles, when it comes to organs, when it comes to skin, when it comes to hair, fingernails, and eyes, all those components are indeed protein or amino acid structures. So very, very important for you just to be able to walk, move, and run. Proteins are the foundation of that. So another couple little things to remember too is each and every one of those cells, there's all sorts of enzyme functions that happen inside cells as well as in the digestive system. All those enzymes are made of proteins or amino acids as well. Hormones, specifically when you look at insulin, insulin is made out of amino acids, and so that's a protein component. And so that kind of gives you a little idea. All the cells actually function with proteins and need them to function. All right, so the other thing when we look at it, immunoglobulins or the immune system. In order for the immune system to function, we have to have proteins as well too. So immunoglobulins are immunoproteins and complement proteins. All these different things are protein molecules. And finally, the nervous system. Those are made out of obviously fatty acid compounds, but the neurotransmitters that are in there that regulate the nervous system are protein components. So kind of a real simple thought, unfortunately, sometimes you almost get hit by a car and the adrenaline just really kicks up. Well, those specifically are amino acids that are phenylalanine and tyrosine get converted in neurotransmitters such as epinephrine that just give us that fight or flight. And once again, those are protein components. So when we look at proteins and the body, about 20% of the body is made of proteins. And obviously 50% plus, usually 50 to 60% is water. And then maybe the other component that would be of abundance would be fat. Some individuals have a little bit more, some individuals have a little bit less. But those are the three primary components that make up the human body, so to speak. So where do we get proteins? I think it's important to understand where we get proteins. We need them daily. We have to have a certain amount. We're going to look at that at the end. Where do we get proteins? Well, they come from protein-rich foods, and there's different types of protein-rich foods. There's animal sources as well as vegetable sources. And so animal sources of proteins would include egg, also milk and milk products. And I like to kind of round that out when we talk about milk products. You look at kefir, you look at cheese, you also look at yogurts. Those are great components, very easy to digest components of what we would call like an animal source, as well as meats, chicken and fish. And so that kind of gives you just a real quick roundabout information about animal proteins. But what about vegetable proteins? So top on the list would be legumes. And so legumes, of course, are nuts as well as beans. And so typically for years, soy proteins have kind of maybe been one of the most instrumental vegetarian type sources, but we're seeing a lot more vegetarian sources hit the market. So hemp proteins, chia proteins, almond proteins, all these being great sources, especially when it comes to nuts and seeds being another source. We see chia as well as hemp being right on the top of the list. So then also whole grains. So rice and oats are probably the most popular that are out there. And finally, vegetable sources as well too. So when we look at those vegetable sources, broccoli as well as potato probably being one of the number one sources on that vegetarian list. So that kind of gives you some sources of protein, so to speak. But one of the other questions that gets so common is how much protein do I need? So looking at the chart here, we see a couple different things. Number one, there is what we call a recommended dietary allowance for protein, which means that you're supposed to have this much each and every day. So when it comes to females, roughly about 50 grams of protein a day. When it comes to males, it's going to be roughly about 60 grams a day. And believe it or not, for elderly, it actually goes up. One of the reasons why is elderly diets are a little bit more restrictive. The other thing is they oftentimes don't get enough proteins, as well as sarcopenia, which is muscle loss, actually requires a little bit more protein when you get older. So those dosages ends up being roughly about 80 grams or a little bit more, especially also if you're a construction worker or working out heavy. 80 grams plus a day definitely becomes more of a baseline for you versus the 50 or 60. All right, so kind of gives you a little bit of information about that as far as the amounts that are required. So, and the food sources. So one thing to remember about it is, proteins being essential, we need them on an everyday basis. It's absolutely important that we get them. And also those food sources, if we're eating those throughout the day, it will provide those sources for us. Looking at the chart once again, we kind of have a little dietary look. So kind of a simple thing, breakfast would maybe, one of my favorite things I like to eat for breakfast, especially on the weekends, is maybe some 7-grain toast with a little bit of peanut butter or some almond butter on it. That would roughly give you anywhere from about 10 to 15 grams of protein. Lunch, like a rice bowl, a little bit of rice, a couple ounces of chicken, some vegetables, roughly give you about 30 grams. And then when we look at dinner, the other night we had a vegetarian lasagna. And so that was kind of packed with different types of cheeses and things of that nature, roughly giving you about 30 grams. So that's a simple way to look at it, where you're getting about 70 total grams for the day. So kind of a simple look, but at the same time, maybe just a nice way to get proteins introduced and maybe understanding what protein foods and how your body needs them. Thanks for watching another Plus Program training series.